The next section of this chapter is showing us how we can import information from another source. In this particular case, we're going to be importing records from Excel file. But to start with, we need to open up the file called A1D6 WinWeb Design. Make sure you're grabbing the A1D6 Access file and opening that. Again, we'll hit Enable Content, and I like to see my table is better than this, so I like to adjust this as well. Okay, the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to click on the External Data button, and notice that we can bring in information from other places. Excel, we could bring it in from another Access file, from another database, a text file, and so on. We're going to work with Access or Excel. Geez, I got to remember to keep getting that right. So the first thing it's going to ask us is where the information is. So specify the source of the definition of the object. So where are we getting this information from? So you're going to have to browse to your Chapter 1 folder. Mine is on my desktop in the Access Chapter 1. And I'm looking for the file called A1D6 Web Contacts. I'm going to click Open. And I just want to stop here for a second. The book just kind of breezes right through this part, but just notice that there's some options here on what we're going to do with this information. The first one is import the source data into a new table. So notice we have 5 tables here. If we don't change this, it's going to give us another table with this information in it. We could also choose append a copy of the records to the table. So if we have a table already in existence that we want to add it to, we could. So we have 5 tables here, we could add it. The only problem with this is that your table and your data have to match. So if this web contacts has a field that this doesn't have, or it's called something different, or it could give you a lot of trouble. So you do want to make sure that if you're going to append it to a current table, that your information in Excel matches this information as far as the types of fields you have and what you have them named. The last option is you can link it to another table. So instead of actually bringing the data in, which anytime we bring more data into our database, it's going to make it bigger, we could link it instead, and it would access that information through the link. In this case, we're going to keep import the source into a new table. So we're going to click OK. The next screen just kind of shows us our information here. We can see we have first name, last name, address, city, state, zip, email, and then the specialty field as well, and that's it. But we do want to check from this area. We want to choose first row contains column headings so that it knows that that's our column headings. We're going to go ahead and hit next again, and notice that it gives us the option to look at our data types here. So we can click on each field and see what the current data type is. We get to the email and we just say we want to make that a hyperlink, so we're going to change that from short text to hyperlink. And I think those are the only changes we need to make there. So we're going to hit next again. And we're going to tell it to let Access choose the primary key. In this case, our data doesn't have anything that's a unique identifier. So we're going to let Access give us that. So it's going to just create an ID field and name them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we're going to go ahead and choose next. And then finally, we're going to import the table, but we're going to give it a name. We're going to call this Web Contacts, and then click Finish. And we don't need to save import steps. The only advantage to that is if you're constantly importing things, you can save those steps, but we're not going to do that. So we're going to click Close. And you can see it almost feels like nothing has happened here, except that now we have a new table. You double click on it and you can see that information is now brought in from Excel into Access here. And we could adjust our columns here so that everything fits nicely, auto fits, if I can get my mouse to work here, the information. So that's how you import data from another source. You will have to do this on the homework. So refer back to this area if needed. The last thing we're going to do here for this chapter is look at something called relationships. And this starts on page 13 in your book. And again, an area that I'd like you to just take a moment to read talks about creating relationships in your database. The last part of this chapter as I mentioned, is referring to relationships. So hopefully you took just a minute to read that section on page 13. But where do you go to create these relationships? The first thing you have to keep in mind is Access will not let you create a relationship between two tables if any of those tables are open. Now, in this case, they're not going to have us create a relationship with the web contents table or contacts table. I'm still going to close it. It just seems to work better. If it asks you if you want to save changes, go ahead and say yes. It just seems to work better if nothing's open when I go to create my relationship. But if you read that information there on page 11 or 13, we know that we create relationships in Excel or Access, in order to better create our database. It makes the information work better. It takes information, as it mentions, in its smallest usable units. And then we use the relationships to link the tables together. So again, as databases were first created, you would have a lot of information that's replicated because there wasn't a way to create these relationships. So in this case, we have customers, employees, invoices, products, and so on. So if we had an employee who sold a product, we would have the entire record would be the customer name, the employee name, the information they purchased, and the products that they purchased, and so on. That would happen in every single record. So you would have the customer in your database multiple times. You'd have the employee in your database multiple times. And so therefore making it difficult to maneuver through your database. So you'd have a lot of information in there, makes it work slower. Plus you have a really good chance of putting wrong information in there or having something wrong because one person enters the customer this way, another person enters it that way, or there's a typo in the customer's address at one time and not the other time, and now you're wondering which is the correct address. So, or you need to change the customer's address and now you have to change it in 50 records instead of just one. So that's why we have separate tables here showing our information. And in your database tools tab here is where you can create relationships with those tables. So I'm going to click the relationships tab there. So again, I went to database tools, clicked to relationships, and it brings up this design tab here. Right now, because this is blank, I can see we have no relationships. So we need to open up this show table window to allow us to pick the tables that we want to create a relationship with. So to start with, we're going to create a relationship between the employees table. So I can click employees and choose add, or I can double click the table. I also want to bring in invoices. So I'm going to double click invoices to bring in that table as well. Those are the only two tables I need. I'm going to choose close. And you can see here that this relationship has already been created. So we don't have to do anything to create it. It's already here. But I just want to show you what this relationship, oops, my mouse just went crazy here. What this relationship means. Oh my, sorry. Stop. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so you see this line from one to the other. We have a one here and we have many here. That means we've created a one-to-many relationship. And even though this button doesn't show, it's hard to see maybe, but it's going from employee ID here to employee ID here. One here, many here. What that means is each employee is going to appear only one time in our employees table, but they could appear many times in our invoices table because hopefully our employees, if they're salespeople, are selling things multiple times. And so therefore they're going to appear on multiple invoices. So this could be the same thing with our customers. We'd have our customers in the customers table one time. We would put them in there. Each customer would only appear once, but they again could appear in the invoices table multiple times because hopefully they're purchasing more than one thing. So that's what a one-to-many relationship means. Why do we put this in here? We put this in here to ensure what they call referential integrity. And they maybe don't really talk about that super specific here in this particular chapter. But what that means is that if we would decide an employee leaves the company and we decided to delete that employee out of this table, which we typically probably wouldn't do, you'd still want to have record of that employee. But if you would do that and delete that, Access would say, hey, wait a second, you have this employee in this invoices table and you can't just get rid of that. You have to somehow maybe assign a different employee to these invoices or assign a different employees to these customers. However, you want to do that. But the database, by having these relationships and referential integrity, will just give you those warnings like, are you sure you really want to do this? And that's why you have what's called a relationship. Number one, to help to not have replicated data, you have it in one spot and then you share it in other areas. And another way is to have that referential integrity. You have an integrity, it helps the integrity of the data, that you're not able to do things without access kind of warning you and saying, hey, are you really sure you want to do this? So that's relationships, and that ends the chapter. Relationships are kind of weird in that they just kind of hang out here. We can hit close and it'll ask us if we want to save. We're going to say yes. But you'll see relationships don't pop up over here at all. You have to go back to database tools and back to relationships, and then it opens it. So it's still here. We saved it. It's there. It just doesn't show up anywhere else. We just have to go to it to see that window. All right, the last thing then I just wanted to mention is you already can see in Blackboard what homework you have to do, probably more than I typically would assign, just because I want you to really practice starting tables and working in databases. So you'll see this book takes you through the first few exercises are reinforce your skills, which really takes you step by step through how to do it. The last one, A1, A3, takes you through setting up a table and such as well, but it doesn't take you step by step. You have to remember how to do it. So the reinforce your skills takes you step by step. The apply your skills, you might have to go back in the book and figure out how to do it if you don't remember how to do something. So lots of practice in Access for this first chapter. Let me know if you have any questions.